Congratulations and welcome to the Cuisinart family of product owners who have discovered how to savor the good life right at home with family and friends. Hi, my name is Mary Rogers. I'm one of the many people at Cuisinart who've worked on bringing you our new Premier Series Prep 7 food processor. You may not know this. Cuisinart introduced the original food processor to the consumer kitchen over 30 years ago, and ever since we've been making it better. Over the years, we've added more models, more accessories, and more functions. Today, with the introduction of the Prep 7, Cuisinart changes the look of food prep and brings new levels of convenience and performance to food processing. It's the next step in the cooking revolution we started so many years ago. During the next 30 minutes, we will show you how to get the most from your Prep 7 food processor. And then we'll show you how easy it is to assemble and use. We will also show you time-saving tips and special techniques that make food preparation part of the fun of entertaining friends and family. Bill Brewa, chef instructor from the Culinary Institute of America, will show you, step by step, several of our favorite recipes that are included in your recipe and instruction booklet. So get comfortable and get ready to see just how easy it's going to be to savor the good life.
Let's take a look at what came with your new Prep 7 food processor. Before unpacking, take a moment to look at the unpacking instructions printed on the top carton flap. Be sure to place the instruction and recipe booklet somewhere handy. You'll find answers to most of your questions in the booklet. Remember, when unpacking, that our blades and discs are precision stainless steel cutting tools with extremely sharp cutting edges. Be careful to always hold the chopping blade by the white hub and the shredding and slicing discs by the outer rims only. Assembling your new food processor is easy, and once it's put together, it takes up very little counter space. You may be glad to know that all the accessories from the traditional Cuisinart 7-cup food processors are compatible with this new model. Now, let's put this together. Start with the newly redesigned motor base. It houses a powerful induction motor that won't bog down, even when mixing very heavy doughs. The touchpad features, pulse, on and off, operate with the touch of a fingertip and wipe clean in seconds. The 7-cup Lexan work bowl is extremely durable, resistant to both hot and cold temperatures, and goes right into the dishwasher for easy cleanup. Place the work bowl onto the motor base with the handle facing the front and positioned just to the left of the center of the unit. Turn it counterclockwise until you hear it click into place. Let's look at that again from the side. Notice how it clicks into place. Next, pick up the chopping blade, holding it carefully by the hub. Place it onto the shaft, using the icon to properly line it up. The dough blade is placed onto the shaft in the same manner as the chopping blade. It lets you create bread dough, pizza dough, and more. We'll show you how to do it later in the video. To attach the slicing or shredding disc, place the stem onto the upturned disc using the symbols to align it properly. Then, push the stem down and turn it clockwise to snap it into place. To use either disc, simply place the stem onto the shaft in the work bowl. Your food processor has an easy twist and lift cover with our extra large feed tube. You can put it on or take it off with one hand. Now, place the cover onto the work bowl with the feed tube just to the left of the work bowl handle and turn it slightly counterclockwise to lock it into place. Notice the size of our feed tube. It is big enough to hold most items without time-consuming pre-cutting. You'll notice that the pusher assembly has a small cylindrical insert. This is a small food pusher. It can be turned clockwise and removed when adding small items or liquids, even during the processing cycle. That's all there is to it. As soon as you plug it into the electrical outlet, your Premier Series Prep 7 food processor will be ready to go to work for you. Now we're going to show you a few basics. These are the techniques that are going to change your life in the kitchen. Let's see what you can do with the extremely versatile chopping blade. It's indispensable when it comes to chopping parsley, grinding nearly any kind of meat, chopping onions, nuts, or making breadcrumbs. Use the pulse button to control the texture of whatever you're processing. Just press and release pulse at intervals of 1 second or less to get just the consistency you want. Now let's take a look at what the slicing disc can do. Simply insert the disc, place selected items into the feed tube, and insert the pusher assembly. Press the pulse control while applying gentle pressure to guide food through the tube. Look how quickly you can make beautiful slices of lemon, cucumbers, peppers, or potatoes. The shredding disc is a real time saver too. Again, insert the appropriate disc. Place selected items into the feed tube and insert the pusher assembly. Use the on button when shredding or slicing large quantities of food. Look how quickly you can shred cheese, cabbage, and carrots. Be sure to turn the machine off when you finish processing. You can make perfect slices of small items, like cucumbers, by removing the small food pusher from the feed tube, inserting the cucumber, and applying pressure. It only takes a few seconds. Remember, this feed tube is large enough to let you slice whole fruits and vegetables too. Now that you know how to assemble and use your new food processor, we have some great recipes to show you, all of which you can find in your recipe and instructions booklet. Enjoy!
Salmon is such a popular fish these days, and this recipe, where it's prepared in a foil packet with potatoes and pesto, guarantees that it stays nice and moist and really delicious. To start with, we need to prepare the potatoes. I'm going to take the ends off these potatoes so that they sit flat in the food processor. To slice these potatoes, we're going to be using a slicing disc, the 4mm slicing disc. The potatoes are all ready. Now let's put the Prep 7 food processor together. I'm going to be using the 4mm slicing disc. That goes right in, and turn it until it engages. And then the top goes on. I'm going to put the potato in. It's as simple as that. Now here, the second potato. There's the third. All right, that piece of work is done. The potatoes are all squared away. Let me set them aside and we'll move on to the salmon. The salmon needs to be seasoned. That's true of any food that you prepare. So I've got some salt here, and fresh ground black pepper. And with a piece of fish this thick, it's a good idea to season both sides of the fish. Okay, now let me show you how to put these packets together. I've got some foil here, and to make sure that the food doesn't stick, I'm going to oil it very lightly with some olive oil. Now, take some of the potatoes and lay them out in the center of the foil. And we have some pesto that I prepared earlier in the food processor. The recipe's in your recipe booklet. It goes very, very quickly. Take a small amount of the pesto and just use it to season the potatoes. Now a piece of salmon and a little bit more of the pesto right on top. To guarantee that this fish stays moist, we're going to seal it inside of a foil packet. Bring the two sides of the foil up and around the fish Fold it over by about an inch and crimp it, and then fold it over again and one more time. Now, bring the edges in from the side, half an inch at a time, and that's ready to go into the oven. Let me show you that one more time. Here's the foil. Make sure you don't forget to oil the foil, otherwise your food will stick. Now, bring the potatoes over and make a nice bed for your salmon. Season the potatoes again with a little bit of the pesto. Piece of salmon right on the top, and just a little more pesto. Bring the two edges up, fold it over by about an inch, crimp it well, and then continue to fold it down. And bring the edges in about half-inch folds. This guarantees that the salmon will stay nice and moist as it steams in its own juices. There we are. Now, these are ready to go into the oven. I've got them in a pan. They should cook at about 400 degrees for about 18 minutes. Okay, let's have a look and see how our salmon is doing. You want to take care to pierce this once or twice to let some of the steam out, because when you open it up, it may well be pretty hot. It smells incredible. There we are. Okay, I've got a plate all ready to go. For a little added garnish, I'm going to shred some basil very, very fine into what's known as a chiffonade. I've got some basil leaves that I stacked one on top of the other, and I'm going to roll them up nice and tight and then slice them very, very thin. This guarantees that the herb doesn't turn black as it sits. There's an enzyme that will react to air. I think it also gives it a nice light look. And then we'll sprinkle the basil on top of the salmon. There it is, dinner, start to finish in about 20 minutes. For me, the test of a really good cook is whether or not they can make a good pie dough, a nice flaky pie dough. So I'm going to show you how to make it in the Prep 7 food processor, and it's really very, very easy. Start by putting the food processor together. I've got the metal cutting blade here. That goes in, and right on top, the flour. This is about 3 cups of all-purpose flour. In addition to the flour, I've got a couple of other dry ingredients that I want to add. One of them is salt. And the second is just a small amount of baking powder. On goes the lid. And I'm just going to turn this on to make sure those ingredients are well mixed. Now, I've got butter and a little bit of shortening here. Both of these are very, very well chilled. That's important. What you're trying to do is to make a dough with pieces of fat in that dough distinct from the dough itself. And that'll only work if you've got the butter and the shortening nice and cold. Now you want to pulse this dough, and you want to continue to pulse it until you see pieces of the fat, the butter and the shortening, no larger than the size of peas. We're just about there. I'm just going to open this up so you can have a look. And at this point, it's time to add some liquid. And to make sure that the butter stays nice and cold, the liquid I'm using is ice water. I'm going to open up the top of the feed tube here, and we'll turn this on and introduce a little bit of water. It should take about a half a cup of water. Okay, I think we're there. Now let's have a look and see what this dough looks like. I'm going to take it out and put it onto the table. Be a little bit careful with this blade because it is very sharp. And even though it looks a little bit crumbly, you should be able to press it together and have it stay. Okay. Before we go on, it's a good idea to refrigerate this dough so that the fat, the butter, and the shortening can firm up again and the dough itself can relax a little bit. I'm going to break it into two pieces. One piece can be for the top crust. That's the smaller piece. And the second piece, a little bit larger, is for the bottom crust. Now, to make things go a little bit smoother here, I have some dough that I made earlier. It's been refrigerated and it's been allowed to relax. And that's what it looks like. And we can go ahead and start rolling this dough out. Begin with a little bit of flour on the table. We want to make sure that it doesn't stick. And take the larger piece of dough for the bottom crust and begin to roll it out. If the dough feels a little bit brittle, it may be that it's too cold. Just allow it to sit at room temperature for 5 minutes or so, and that will temper the dough and give it a chance to soften just a little bit. As I roll it out, you can see that there's some large pieces of butter that still haven't been homogenized into the dough. That's what gives you a nice flaky pie crust. You should also notice that as I roll, it doesn't shrink back on itself. If you mix the dough too much, it'll get tough and elastic, and as you try and roll it out, it will begin to shrink. Periodically, turn the dough, make sure that there's flour underneath, and make sure that it hasn't stuck to the table, and then continue to roll. Roll from the center to the outside. Don't just roll willy-nilly back and forth, because what you'll discover is that your dough will start to become tough. It's almost like kneading bread when you roll it too much. And that looks just about right. Here's the pan we're going to be using. Looks like we're going to have to go just a little bit larger. All right. To transfer this dough to the plate, I'm going to roll it up onto the rolling pin. And then unroll it onto the pie plate. At this point, take a little bit of care not to stretch the dough. Instead, tent it up and allow it to fall into the pan so that you don't create any extra tension. That will make your pie dough shrink in unusual ways when it starts to bake. And I'm going to trim the edges just a little bit. If it's a little raggedy, don't worry at this point, because we've got plenty of opportunities to set that right. There we are with the bottom crust. That's all done. Now I'm going to roll the top crust, and then we'll be ready to get a start on the filling. Now that I've got the dough rolled, it's time to start on the filling. I've got peeled, quartered, seeded apples and pears, and slicing these is a breeze using the food processor. The slicing disc is already in place. I'm going to take the quartered apples and stack them into the feed tube until it's nearly full. There we go. And just carry on until all the apples are sliced. You want to make sure to stand them up on end. That way you'll get uniform slices. Now, once the apples are sliced, I'm going to make a point of putting some lemon juice on them to keep them from turning dark. Now we'll do exactly the same thing with the pears. Okay, just like with the apples, I'm going to take the pears, put them back into the bowl, and sprinkle a little bit of lemon juice over the top to keep them from browning. And then we've got one last piece before we begin to assemble our pie. I just need to mix together some maple syrup with just a little bit of vanilla and some lemon juice. To begin with, I'm going to put down a layer of apples, about a half of these apples, and sprinkle those with just a little bit of flour. That will help absorb some of the liquid that's going to be given off as the apples cook. But I also like to add some dried fruit. And the dried fruit, as it begins to rehydrate, also absorbs some of that liquid. Next, I'm going to put in a layer of pears. Again, about half of the pears. On top of that, a little more flour, maybe a tablespoon or so. Some more of the dried fruit. And carry on in this fashion until all the apples and all the pears have been used up. Here's the last of the dried fruit. These are actually dried cranberries. And just a little bit more flour. And then, over the top of everything, the maple syrup, the vanilla, and the lemon juice. Now, so that the top crust will stick to the bottom, I'm going to moisten the dough around the edges with just a little bit of water. Okay, we can transfer the top crust over and press the two edges together so that you get a nice seal. And I'm going to trim any excess dough. And you can crimp the edge in a decorative fashion. You can use your imagination here. It doesn't have to be as simple as I'm doing it. Some people like to make it look like rope. Others just press it together with a fork. And then so that it bakes and browns nicely, I think it's a good idea to brush the entire top with a little bit of milk. Not so much that it pools, just enough to moisten it. And the sugars in this milk will help this brown nicely and evenly. And to give it sort of a jeweled appearance, I like to sprinkle a little bit of granulated sugar over the top as well. If you see little pools of milk on the top, make sure you take the extra time to just go and mop up a little bit after yourself. And finally, a very light sprinkling of granulated sugar. All right, before this goes into a 400-degree oven, we need to make some cuts to allow the steam to escape from this pie as it bakes. Otherwise, the dough will just become soggy. There we are, all ready for the oven. Okay, the pie is out of the oven, and I gave it a chance to cool, but I would say it was in the oven for about 60 minutes at 375 degrees. If you find that it's browning a little bit too quickly, then by all means turn the oven down. But this came out just about right. So there you have it, all different kinds of fall fruit together in a wonderful pie, thanks to your Prep 7 food processor. Let's take a couple of seconds to learn how to make pizza, everybody's favorite food. That way you can be sure that nobody's going to be disappointed. To begin with, we need to proof the yeast. Basically, you take yeast and add it to warm water and a little bit of sugar. And what it does is proves to you that it's still viable. You can see how foamy it's become. That's your indication that this yeast is vital. Okay, let's step over to the food processor. And what I've done is I've put the metal blade into the work bowl. For a dough that's this small, I'm using the metal blade instead of the dough blade. In goes all of the flour, and also a little bit of salt. And I'm just going to mix that briefly so that those two ingredients have the opportunity to blend. Okay, now we're going to introduce a little bit of the yeast. And while it mixes, add the rest. What I'm looking for here is for the flour to absorb the liquid, and the way I'll know that's happened is the bowl will start to clean itself. There won't be any dough hanging on the outside. Once the dough cleans the bowl, the way you see it has here, give it about 30 seconds to mix. This is the kneading portion of this dough mixing. It needs that amount of mixing to become really elastic. Okay, this dough is just about kneaded. I think that should do it. What we're going to do is take it out, and we need to set it aside to rise for about a half an hour or so. Take a little bit of care when you take the blade out of the dough because it is very sharp. And the way that I like to store this dough is right inside of a Ziploc bag. That way it's protected from drafts and rises without any difficulty whatsoever. All right, the sauce is on, and here goes the cheese. Not so much that it weights the dough down. It's always a mistake I think people make, putting too much onto a pizza. And then I also have some basil leaves, and I'm just going to tear them into big pieces and put them on the top. There we are. Everything's set, and this pizza can go into an oven at about 475 degrees. Make sure that the pizza is loose on the peel. Put it to the back of the stone, and then just slide the peel out from underneath the pizza. And we'll put this to bake for about 15 minutes. There we are, just out of the oven. Doesn't that look great? Now that you know how to make the dough yourself, you can put any kind of topping on you like. Really tailor it to your own tastes. This quick and easy appetizer from the Mediterranean, hummus, makes a really terrific starter to a summer meal. Let me show you what we've got here. I'm going to start by chopping some parsley in the food processor. In it goes. I've got the cutting blade in there, and I want to pulse this 10 or 15 times. Okay. And we're going to set this parsley aside so that we can add it back a little bit later on. Now, for the rest of this recipe, we're going to begin with some lemon zest that I took from the outside of a lemon, made sure there was no pith on it, and a little bit of salt, and we're going to grind that up. When you see that it's nicely ground, then take a couple of cloves of garlic and add them right through the feed tube. There's no need to take the top off. And continue to pulse until the garlic is ground up as well. All right. Now, take the lid off and we'll put in the chickpeas. These chickpeas were canned, and I rinsed them and drained them, and then rinsed them one more time, and then made sure that they were well drained before I put them in. Here I've got some tahini, which is sesame paste. Tahini is to sesame seeds what peanut butter is to peanuts. A little bit of lemon juice, some cumin, and just a little bit of water. And we'll turn the food processor on and let this mix until it's nice and creamy. We're looking for it to be homogeneous as well, so that this is nice and creamy. While the machine is running, we're going to introduce a little bit of olive oil. Okay, the hummus looks nice and creamy at this point, and what I want to do is take about half of the parsley that we chopped earlier and add it back to the work bowl. And we'll mix that in. We're looking for nice flecks of green throughout the hummus. We're not looking to grind it up so far that it turns everything green. About 20 or 30 seconds should be enough. All right, this is nice and creamy. And we'll put some right into our serving bowl. Traditionally, this hummus is served with a drizzle of olive oil and some olives. But we today are going to serve it with a flatbread, pita bread, and a little sprinkling of chopped parsley. There you have it, a perfect start to a summer meal. I'd like to show you a recipe for a salsa that's very, very easy, very tasty, and really colorful. I think you can impress a lot of people with this. It starts with jalapeno peppers that have had the seeds taken out. They go right in, along with some cilantro or fresh coriander. And we're going to pulse this a couple of times in the work bowl of the food processor until it's coarsely chopped. Okay, that's about all it takes. Next, I've got some onions. Those go into the bowl as well. And we'll chop those. All right. Now the tomatoes. Depending on how ripe they are, you've got to be a little bit careful. They've been diced up about an inch square. They go into the food processor bowl, and we'll pulse it until they're coarsely chopped. That's about all that needs. It smells terrific. And then finally, a little bit of lime juice, a little bit of salt, and I've got some frozen corn kernels, and I'll add those as well. Now we don't want to chop this corn up, just really mix it together, so no more than a second or so. Okay, that's all there is to it. Now let me clean some of these things away. First, I'm going to take the blade out, set that aside. If you can have this salsa sit for about an hour or so, it really helps a lot to let the flavors mingle. I'm not sure that I can wait that long. There you go. It's about 5 minutes, start to finish. When the weather turns hot, there's nothing like a cold soup to start a meal. And of all the cold soups, I would say gazpacho is the most famous. And so that's the one we're going to make today. I'm going to start with a seeded jalapeno and a clove of garlic in the work bowl of the food processor. I've got the metal cutting blade in place, and we're going to pulse this just until those two ingredients are finely chopped. There's really nothing worse than a really big piece of jalapeno to set your mouth on fire. Okay, when it's nicely minced, I'm going to move on. I'm going to put some cilantro into the work bowl. Also some green onions. and some green pepper. And we'll chop those ingredients up as well. You can decide for yourself exactly how much texture you want to leave in your gazpacho. I like it a little bit chunky. Okay, that looks just about right. So I'm going to take all of these ingredients and put them into a mixing bowl before moving on. This way they won't get over-processed and become mushy. The next ingredient is going to be tomato. And when tomatoes are really ripe, they taste great, but you need to be a little bit careful when you process them in the food processor. I've got them cut up into 1-inch cubes. And we'll just pulse it once or twice until you get the texture you're looking for. That looks good to me. And those ingredients also go into the mixing bowl. At this point, I'm going to switch to the 4mm slicing disc because we're going to cut some cucumbers as a garnish. That's all set and ready to go. You can see as I mix this together, it's nice and colorful, but it's a little bit dry still. And to take care of that, in goes some tomato juice. We're going to season it with some lemon juice, a little bit of salt, and fresh ground black pepper. Okay, we're all set to make the garniture. So I've got some peeled and seeded cucumbers. And I'm going to put those into the small feed tube vertically. Turn the machine on. And that's that. You can see how nicely these cucumbers are sliced. Keep in mind when you cut the cucumbers up that this gazpacho is going to be eaten from a soup spoon, so that these pieces of cucumber shouldn't be too large. Now, for this to be a really refreshing soup, we need to set it aside in the refrigerator for about an hour to chill. You could make this easily a day ahead of time and then save yourself a little bit of headache on the day of your party. We don't really have time to let this chill now, but I'd like to show you what this dish looks like when it's completely served. Come on over here. I've got a bowl. I'm going to take some of the soup and ladle it right on in. And you can garnish this a number of different ways. Croutons make a nice garnish. Sliced green onions make a nice garnish. But what I'm going to be using today is a little bit of sour cream and a sprig of cilantro. Just float the sour cream right on top. And get the nicest looking cilantro you can find. And there you have it, a chilled gazpacho. This soup is really the truest expression of what's best from the summer's garden. Asian food is really hot these days. This Asian spin on coleslaw is one that I think is really going to please you. Take a look at what I'm going to do. I've got some peanuts, and we're going to start by chopping them in the bowl of the food processor fitted with a metal chopping disc. Just pulse it once or twice, and that should be enough. Okay. I'll put those right back into the same bowl, and we'll set them aside until we need them later on. Now we're going to make the dressing. The dressing is going to start with a clove of garlic and a couple of slices of peeled ginger. What we need to do is process this until it's really finely minced. It shouldn't take more than about 5 seconds. Okay, that looks good. Now, to finish this dressing, I've got some other ingredients. First, peanut butter. A little bit of sugar, that can go in. Hoisin sauce. Rice wine vinegar. And a little bit of soy sauce. Once all those ingredients are together, put the lid on and process it until it's nice and creamy. I think about 10 seconds ought to do it. When it's nice and creamy, we're going to add a little bit of sesame oil. We're going to add it a little at a time and allow this dressing to emulsify. Okay, that looks great. Now, what I'm going to do is save the dressing right here in this pitcher until we need it a little bit later on. Now it's time to get ready to process all the vegetables that are going to be in our coleslaw. I've got a nice clean bowl, and I'm going to use the shredding disc. Get this in place, and go ahead and put the lid on, and we're ready to go. I'm going to start with some radishes, and I'm just going to place them cut side down in the large feed tube. And then I've got some carrots, which I'm going to lay horizontally into the feed tube, and also some broccoli stems that I'll place right on top. Okay, here we go. Good. At this point, I'm going to switch from the shredding disc. But first, let me take these vegetables that are shredded really, really nicely, and I'm going to move them over into a nice mixing bowl. For the next group of vegetables, we're going to be using the slicing disc. I'm going to start by slicing some green onions, and I'm going to use the small feed tube. Take the green onions and pack them into the small feed tube vertically. Once you get them into place, turn the machine on and just press them through. Okay, now I'm going to switch to the larger feed tube, and I'm going to stack up first some yellow peppers. Stack them up vertically. Turn the machine on. And I'm going to do the same with some Chinese cabbage. Take it and stack it vertically in the feed tube. And then finally I have some bok choy. And handle that exactly the same way. After you've cleaned it and cut it, keep it nice and tight and stack it vertically in the large feed tube. There's no need to empty the bowl between different vegetables. You can see them. They all gather here in the work bowl. All the vegetables are nicely sliced into what looks like julienne to me, but it was much, much easier than if I'd done it with a knife. I've got a couple of other vegetables that I'm going to add, snow peas and some broccoli florets. So we'll mix all the vegetables together. You can see what a beautiful color this is. When it's nicely mixed, it's time to add the dressing. There should be just enough dressing to moisten these vegetables. And I usually like to let this sit for about a half an hour for the flavors to mingle. All right, let's plate this up. And then the chopped peanuts from earlier just get sprinkled over the top. There's our Asian slaw with peanut dressing. I think with a piece of grilled fish or grilled chicken, you've got a meal.